Hi friends, host Eric here, host Talking with People. I gotta do a second take of this video because my audio crapped out last time. It's called Top 5 Tricks to Win Every Argument. I'm a little frustrated that I have to redo it because I thought I did a pretty good job last time. Anyway, here we go. My name's host Eric. I am a debate coach as well as host of Talking with People. And I've watched a lot of elite debate rounds and judged a lot of elite debate rounds and coached a lot of elite debaters, and I'm very familiar with how argumentation goes down in competition flow debate at the top level below college. Now, college top level competition debate is not really any stronger or more sophisticated than high school. If anything, it's stupider because of a lot of reasons that I want to get into. So, the following table presents the habits and methods that elite debaters consistently use to win rounds. While the information herein comes from highly technical, top-level competition flow debate, these tricks are just as effective and as determinate in street argumentation. Framework. I begin with the assumption that some disinterested third party or parties are there to observe and draw conclusions regarding the winner and loser of the argument, and I further assume that your goal is to win the argument in the eyes of that third party rather than to convince your opponent, for example, or to attain a commitment to act from your opponent or something like that. Really what I mean here is debate. I put argument because it's like when people have street debates, they usually refer to them as arguments. But just so we don't get mushy with terms, because argument means something specific, and debate refers to a set of arguments, a rhetorical exchange between people, adversarial rhetorical exchange between people that's comprised of arguments. Okay, so this is about who wins the debate. It's not about convincing your opponent. This is something interesting that Brittany kept doing, was she kept thinking that people were trying to convince her of something. Nobody was trying to convince her of something. They were just saying, you're making incredibly shitty arguments and you shouldn't be permitted to win the debate as a consequence. Okay, let's go down here. Fifth place. The fifth place winner. Oh, is there somebody in the room? Let me see. No, there's not. The fifth place winner is reject and provoke rewordings. Well, what do I mean by this? Well, first of all, the specs. When do you use this? You use this as a defensive strategy for your own stuff, or as an offensive strategy against your opponent's stuff. And you use it when? By answering cross-examination questions, that's what CX means, or in asking cross-examination questions, or in answering ATs. So ATs are answer tos. In other words, somebody makes a claim that's an assertion that begins an argument chain. The response to that initial claim is the AT. The response to your response to that initial claim is the AT-AT. And again, AT stands for answer to. Okay. Perhaps the first step sequentially in attacking a given case is to turn what your opponent says into something else. Don't agree to rewordings and get your opponent to do so. All right, you just said blah, 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 blah. So would you agree that means basically blah, 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 blah? You want to say, what I said was blah, 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 blah. But wouldn't you agree that means, not necessarily, I'm not making that assertion, I'm not making that claim. In other words, don't let them get you to make claims you're not making. And don't agree to claims you're not making as equivalent to claims you are making. In the same token, do that to your opponent. Get them to agree to equivalencies and get them to say, yeah, that's what that means. Here's this other wording that you just provided means, yeah, okay, those are the same. Well, now all of a sudden you've opened up two sets of words that I can attack, not just one. Fourth place. Fourth place in the top trick competition. Impact against frames, you might say impact against definitions. When extending arguments, that means, let's say you've made an argument, they haven't responded to it, you have to make more of that argument, you have to extend it. You can use it then, you can use it when making answer twos, you can use it when weighing, that is to say, well, here's what they have and here's what I have, and this is why mine's way better. People are often well into an argument before they realize there is a lack of shared units in which the respective merits of two piles of impacts can be hashed out. So that's why you need to impact against frames. A good example of this would be something like they keep saying that it's going to lower standard of living for everybody. But we keep pointing out that if we don't do it, it's going to cause some people to die. It's going to kill some people. And so, in that instance, in order to understand how those impacts work against each other, you have to have a definitional link to a sanctity of life versus quality of life definitional gate of some sort. And so if I were to say it's going to really negatively affect quality of life, then I have to also make an argument as to why we should consider quality of life more important than sanctity of life in this situation. That's what I mean by impacting against frames. Third place winner in top tricks competition. Crystallization. Repeatedly crystallize. In other words, take this big pile of complicated ideas and mush it down to a tag. Take this big complicated pile of ideas and mush it down to a tag. Use it as a way of flow pacting. Flow pacting is telling the judge or the third parties why these sets of arguments should be considered determinate. The voters, why you've won. And you do it as a way of making prefer our framework arguments. This is why we prefer my framework over there, is because this is what's happening, this is what's happening, this is what's happening. You can see how their framework doesn't really work very well for this. So continually revisiting what has already been said, restating it, and saying what that means provides the elite debater the means by which... I don't like that. The methods, the mechanism, the approach. Approach. By which he can repurpose and define that which has already happened. And that's the thing. The past is not set in terms of what it means. It's set in terms of what it said. So you can always rework the interpretation of what was said, or reframe it, or impact it against frames, or do all that kind of shit. And the best way to do that is to tag it out. What does this also mean? It's kind of like a little bit of straw manning, but it's not really straw manning. It's so much as it is node reducing. You say, all this argumentation has occurred already about how the impact of this given proposed advocacy is going to affect corruption in government, for example. All this argumentation has happened. We're going to call all that argumentation corruption. All right, so on the corruption point, the crystallization is, remember, Judge, all the argumentation that's happened there, we've won it because they failed to make the link to framework. I've explained that already in detail, but they failed to make that link. So remember, corruption, no link. Now, next argumentation block. That's how you convince judges that you really won. Because what you're displaying there is that you understand what's already happened on the flow. You're making a clear advocacy regarding how the judge ought to interpret what's happened on the flow. And if you do that more effectively than your opponent, then you're presenting the round in conceptual chunks that are appropriately sized for actually processing the action correctly. Okay. Next one. Second place. Milk reciprocal burdens. This is a simple one. It requires you to learn one sentence. Strategy to making answers or answer to answers. Here's the one sentence. But if you use my opponent's reasoning to justify matters like the one we're discussing today, then horrible atrocity X would be justified. And we all know that's not cool. So reject my opponent's reasoning. Basically, this second one could also be said, refute reasoning by applying it more broadly. And spend more energy refuting reasoning by applying it more broadly than you are answering specifics answering the specifics of that reasoning. It's basically saying frame up, frame level up. Okay. And the number one trick that elite debaters use to win every argument is turn. Don't counter, turn. It's a strategy for all answers, and it's a strategy for all answers to answers. Counters say, no, you are wrong. If I say, I have action F will cause impact G because of warrant H. Action F will cause impact G because of warrant H. Counter says, nuh-uh, it won't cause that impact. Action F will not cause impact G. Mitigators say, well, sort of. No, action F will cause impact I, which is like impact G, but much less important. This I'd say, action F will cause impact G, but will also cause impact I, which is totally different and also very bad. Alt say, action F may cause impact G for reason H, but action S will cause impact T for reason V, and impact S and impact F are somehow exclusive of each other, and so we should do action S instead. Okay. Turns, on the other hand, are the best way to deal with any claimed impacts. Because turns say either one of two things. Action F does cause impact G for reason H, but impact G is actually an impact that helps me, not you. Or they say action F does behave according to reason H, but it doesn't cause impact G. It causes impact H. And it causes impact M. And impact M is totally on my side. So in other words, turns say, you got a touchdown in the wrong end zone. Counters say, no, you're wrong. Mitigators say, well, you're sort of right. This ad say, okay, you're right, but also this. Alt say, maybe you're right, but we shouldn't really do that anyway, because we should do this other thing. And then turns say, you got a touchdown in the wrong end zone. Yes, you scored 7 points. For me, moron. That's a much stronger way to go, right? When you can't. And the best way to turn is always to quote your opponent. You said blah, 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 blah. Those were your exact words. And that means, boom, you scored in the wrong end zone. The reason turns are better is because of what they ask the judge to do in general, and also because of how they deal with impacts, like I said. And thirdly, because of the way they force the opponent to defend half of their argument. It causes their argument to go half against them. So when you concede half of it, now they don't know whether to defend that half and argue against your turn, or whether to kick that half because you're going to win the turn and take their impacts. And as a consequence, the judge, in the first one, the counter, the judge is going to go, all right, well, you lost the counter, so therefore the AF still retains all their impacts, or you won the counter, so the AF loses all their impacts, or it was a wash, the counter was a wash, in which case the AF's going to get some of their impacts. Mitigators go, you won the mitigator, so the impacts from the AF are diminished. You lost the mitigator, so the impacts from the AF are unaffected. Or the mitigator's a wash, so the impacts from the AF are slightly affected. Disads go, if you win the disad, they get their impacts, you get your impacts, which presumably outweigh. If you lose the disad, they get their impacts for sure because you've already conceded it in making a disad, and you don't get any of your disad impacts. If the disad's a wash, then they still get all their impacts because you just making the disad concedes the impacts, and it doesn't necessarily concede it concedes the. It concedes the advocacy happens. It concedes fiat at least. And anyway, it's complicated. I don't want to get into all that. But the point is, the best thing that can happen is the impacts that you present as outweighing, you get those. You're not going to negatively affect their impacts. Alts, you have to win the alt completely or else nothing happens for you. And it's a gamble to win the alt because, if you're trying to get the judge to say, make this binary, do what I say instead. But the problem with alts is, if I'm advocating that you agree with my advocacy, then I'm saying my advocacy is better than doing nothing, or better than the status quo. I'm not saying my advocacy is better than every other idea in the world, or that it's the best thing we could possibly do. And nobody should have to meet that criterion in order to get agreement. So that's why alts are a little bit challenging. Turns, they do the best thing for the judge because they get the judge to say, okay, I'm going to work with impacts, and so I can give you this argument chain. I can agree with your turn, give you the argument chain without necessarily giving you the whole round, but that'll get you probably to the round. I can work with it. You're not asking me to do too much too soon. It's adjudicatorily appropriate for me to weigh this heavily without feeling as though I'm intervening too much as the judge. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I like making videos about debate stuff a lot. If anybody has any questions or anything, and put it in the comments, I'll make a video about it almost for sure because I love debate and I love rhetoric. I love arguing and I like philosophy, ideation. And the thing is, my position on reality is that it's really comprised almost entirely of arguments. And so that's cool. And, whatever else. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. And have yourself a very, very Merry Christmas.